Yesterday we talked a lot about theoretical things. You know, we talked about legal contracts and some other things that people need to know when they're bringing their brand into the U.S. The focus today is going to be much more on practical things. And the gentlemen that are on the panel here are each represent a unique entity in the space of importing and distributing. And the hope here is to give you all a better understanding of the realities of the distribution and import system in the United States and what implications that has for those of you in the audience. So I'm just going to briefly introduce them by name. They're each going to give you a personal introduction, and then we're going to open it up to questions, okay? So from my left is Martin Sinkoff. Martin is Vice President and, I didn't have your title here, sorry. I did on another page. Right. Vice President at Frederick Wildman, one of the most respected importers with a great history in the United States, well known in the industry. And to his left is Rob Bradshaw. Rob is CEO of, or COO of Cape Classics, which you might have used to know them as specializing in South African wine. That's what they started in, but they have this great new portfolio of Burgundy wines, and I can tell you from personal experience, the wines are spot on. Okay, and then to his left is Mick Yurch. Mick is president of the Bluest Sky Group. He's a consultant and does some of the things that I do, so we kind of compete a little, but it's okay, all right. But probably more important in terms of credibility for today, Mick was the owner of Sherry Lehman for like 34 years and has tremendous experience, not just on the retail side, obviously, but also because he worked very closely doing direct import and those kinds of things. So for those of you who are saying, hey, what about this three-tier system? I thought that there are kind of three distinct levels. Yeah, kind of, sort of. So we can talk a little bit about that later too. And then all the way to the left, my left, is Mike Votto. Mike is CEO of Votto Vines. It's a relatively new distributor or import company set up in Connecticut that I've been watching from when they first began, and they're doing some really, really great creative things. So I'm going to start off with, from my left, Martin, do you want to just introduce yourself? No, sit. Yeah. This is like a chat.
Very good. All right, well, good morning, everyone. And thank you all for coming today. And Steve, thank you for organizing all of us.
Thank you.
And organizing the conference. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in the wine trade since 1978. And I started very classically as a clerk in a retail store. A little more about that in a moment. It still is a competitor of the store that Mick ran. It was called Morel. It is called Morel and Company. And it was located, and this is important, at 307 East 53rd Street, which is 53rd in Manhattan between 1st and 2nd Avenues. It was a wonderful store. It had a big footprint. People could go in. There were cases on the floor. And the Morels are a colorful family, and they would shout at each other all the time from one part of the store to the other. After that, I went to France. I was the assistant to a man who was very important in the American wine trade and is sadly a bit forgotten today, but his name was Alexis Lachine, and Alexis really was in the forefront, along with some other people, very famous people like Julius Weil and Michel Dreyfus and Frank Schoonmaker, in bringing French wines to the United States in the post-war period. His son, Sacha Lachine, has surpassed even his father with the creation of a fabulous rosé called Whispering Angel, which gives me a lot of headaches because we're a competitor of his. But he's done a terrific job. So I worked in France for Alexis Lachine for a year, and when I got back, I was hired by a large distributor in Texas to help put them in the wine business, and I did that for 10 years. I'm going to go fast so that my colleagues on the panel can talk about themselves. 10 years as a distributor, 10 years owning my own company. We were the importer of a champagne that's done very well in the United States called Nicolas Foyat, among other brands. And then I sold that company, merged it with another company in New York that has since been merged into another company. And short story, when Frederick Wildman decided to create a fine wine division, they came knocking on my door, and the rest is Director of Marketing and Vice President of Frederick Wildman, which is a company that has a long, long history in the United States. In fact, pre-Prohibition, was founded by Frederick Wildman himself, now long passed away, but who founded it as a retailer in New York as well. So we're back to the retail trade. The last thing I'm going to say is that the curiosities of life is that the offices of Frederick Wildman today are at 307 East 53rd Street. I'm in the same building today that I started in 1978.
That's amazing.
Rob.
So I just want to start that this is like Hall of Fame material for what I do, so I feel very, very excited to be sitting next to Martin. My career is a little bit of a shorter one. I spent 8 years as the national wine buyer of Trader Joe's. So we had a pretty big run in those years from 2002 to 2009. Leaving Trader Joe's as we're about to become America's second billion-dollar wine retailer, probably #1 in cases though. I got it was just time for something new. You know, the principles of Trader Joe's that drove me of amazing product and consumer engagement, I felt as my career went like this, I was moving away from product. And along came a gentleman named Andre Shearer, who I think you guys know really well, my dearest friend and mentor, who started a company 25 years ago this September called Cape Classics, who had a vision for how to trade in this industry, which is sometimes a little scary, how to find the right products, how to build relationships, how to find products that will change people's lives and do better for society. And I fell in love with that vision, and in 2009 I joined Andre at Cape Classics. Fast forward to 2013, we made a big decision after 21 years being exclusively South African. You know, at the time we represented about 1/3 of all South African wine in the United States came through our company. We made the big decision to expand to France with the vision of being always America's #1 South African importer and getting into the dialogue of amongst America's best in France, where we are today. In 2017, France is now just about 20% of our business. We have a exciting dynamic portfolio in the Loire, in Burgundy, in the south of France. We just launched our first Bordeaux product this month, which this gentleman knows a little bit about Bordeaux. And here we are today with you, Steve.
Hi, I'm Michael Yurch. I'm Mick Yurch because I shared an office with Michael Aaron for, 28 years. And so when the phone rang, Michael, it's for you, didn't work. So I got Mick, and it's kind of stuck. I've only been in the business since 1980, Martin, so I take my hat off to you. We were the other big retailer in New York, and we did just as much shouting as the Morels did, I'm sure. I knew Alexis Lachine as well, and Rob talks about the Hall of Fame. I think Martin and I were very fortunate to come up in this industry in an era post-World War II where America was just starting to grasp fine wine, and Sherry Lehman and certainly the Morels developed that trade in New York City and largely in the country. The Bordeaux market was different then, as Rob has alluded to. Much of the market, it was different then. You had to know Frank Schoonmaker. You had to know Alexis Lachine. I came up under Sam Aaron, and they were all pals, and Joe Baum and the Four Seasons, and there was kind of a, I don't want to say mafia, but there was kind of a rat pack of wine guys that we looked up to, our generation, and it was great to learn with those guys. It was a different era. I mean, we're going to get into some of what drives the market now, but back then, the reason it was really cool for Martin to work for the Morels, and it was really cool for me to work for Sam Aaron, was those guys knew where the good product was, because good product was not ubiquitous as it is today. There was a lot of wine down here, and there wasn't a whole lot up here. There wasn't even a whole lot in the middle. And you'd go to Morel or you'd go to Sherry Lehman because those guys knew where to get the good juice. And you know, as an industry, it's a blessing and a curse, and it's part of the reason we're all here today. You know, the tide, winemakers, it's funny. My partner used to say, the French are crazy. Well, why are the French crazy? Well, because Emile Pannel and all the French consultants were flying around the world, and working together with other enologists in South Africa, in South America, wherever. He'd say, the French are crazy. They're flying around the world giving away the secret recipe to good wine. Well, I used to say, you're out of your mind. Well, you know, he really wasn't. He was exactly right. And a lot of the challenges we face today, I was a retail buyer in this market from 1980 until 2012. And the theory behind my new company, the Bluest Sky Group, is that we can at least bring to our client wineries the sort of, here's the retail buyer, you've got to show me what you have, and I'm going to show you whether it works or not, at least as a buyer in a major market in the United States. And these guys have sold to me over the years, at least these two guys over here, and we've kind of just, the Bluest Sky Group kind of turns that around, and Steve and I, as Steve said, we're friendly competitors. We have slightly different approaches, and I think this business, Martin and I were just joking, you can't get out of this business. Maybe we should be in the shoe business or the car business or something else, but this business is in your blood. It's a lifestyle, and we're still here, and proudly so. So thanks, and look forward to some good questions.
Morning, Mike Votto, Votto Vines. I'm the new guy on the block. I don't want to make Martin feel old, but in 1978 I was 1. So I also started my professional career in Manhattan, not in this business, came from completely outside of the industry. I was a lawyer for a bunch of years, but grew up in a big Italian family. So myself, my brother, my cousins, we always had an interest in the food and beverage industry. So in 2009, we started an import company in Connecticut. We all kept our day jobs. We had a 1,000-square-foot office warehouse and delivered out of my brother's Subaru for 12 months to see if we could make a go of it in the wine business. We sold 1,000 cases of wine locally, but I think our thesis was that there was an opportunity for some young entrepreneurial kind of hustlers, particularly on the importing and distribution side, which I think will resonate with a lot of folks in this group, trying to get their product into the country. And we just started hunting everywhere we could across the globe for the latest and greatest, the new, the best, the different, the niche products that could have a different price point, different style, different packaging, whatever something different and unique that we could then take. We quickly found out that developing a distribution company locally was going to be a challenge. We have since begun to scale our Connecticut operation. We also have wholesale operations small in New York and New Jersey. But we really expanded our national platform very, very quickly over the last 8 years. We've been fortunate. We've gone from 1,000 cases to, I don't know, we'll do 300,000 or 400,000 this year. Wow. Across 46 states, Puerto Rico and Canada. And what have we done? We have tried to find really niche-y and targeted channels for our wines, particularly national accounts. As I said, we've scaled our local distribution business a bit, and we work with a lot of online retailers that are selling direct to consumer. And so that's essentially our story. It's been, I think it's been really exciting learning the industry, and hopefully we can provide some insight today.
Great. So we're going to start a Q&A. I'll ask the first question, but before I do, I realized I forgot to do a shout out to Sid and Malvika Patel, who are the guys really behind the whole show, and it was originally their idea. Run it. This is a question I get a lot from producers from around the world, wine, spirits, ciders, beers. And whoever wants to answer first, just kind of raise your hand. I know you guys get lots of cold calls every week. How can I, as a producer, stand apart from the crowd and get your attention? What should I lead with? Should I lead with my wine story, or is something more about the opportunity my brand brings to your business? So I'll leave that open. How do I get your attention?
I can go. You've got to be interesting. It's a vague answer, but you've got to be interesting. There has to be a story. There has to be a reason. You know, something we share with a lot of people in South Africa and France and anyone that calls is simply because you make wine doesn't mean anyone wants to buy it. So the key is, how can you stand out? How can you be interesting? What are you doing? You know, if you had 60 seconds or 30 seconds in your last minutes to just extol why what you do is amazing and why people need to be part of it, if you can't distill that in that 60 seconds, you have no chance of anyone taking that meeting. None, because there's just too much noise. One of us, not to speak for you guys, but has to see something, actually has to feel something in your pitch that says, this is special. Because on one hand, there is so much wine that nobody needs, honestly, but there are those stories that instantly connect. So I think the way to do it is have that story ready and be able to deliver it very, very quickly and succinctly.
Great. Anybody else want to comment on that?
No, if I may, no, I couldn't agree more. One problem I just had that I think speaks to that question, though, you've also got to do your homework. I mean, whether you're a winery in Rioja or you producer of Sancerre, whatever you are, if you're trying to break into this market, you've really, I just got back from Provine in Vinitaly, and Vinexpo's coming up, and speaking to a lot of newer wineries, at least trying to break into this market. You've got to know your sort of price niche in the pantheon, if you will. I'm working with a southern Italian producer, and from Apulia. All right, he's making Salice Salentino. It doesn't matter what you make, but you've got to study this market and understand that you can't. I mean, he wanted to come in with a $30 Salice, and the market right now is
$10.
$10. Mm-hmm. You'd have to be awfully special. I mean, you'd have to be awfully special to get the face time of the buyer to even tell the interesting story. I remember someone from your company came in and sold me a $30 South African Chenin Blanc one time. That was a hell of a story. but aside from that, and that was also 12 or 15 years ago. Right now, FaceTime is limited, to say the least, and you've got to seize it. But stepping back, you really have to understand not your winery's place, but again, wherever you're from, whatever you're selling, you need to understand the going rate in the market that you're pitching. And I've encountered many that don't. So I mean, it sounds basic, but it's something that needs to be covered.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's the exact point I was going to make. I think all of us get, I don't know, 100 inbounds a week, and we try to distill through them very, very quickly and find things that are interesting. And a sure way for us to just hit delete on your email is to have an €8 Chianti Classico, because it doesn't matter if it's the best Chianti Classico that has ever been produced in the history of the world. I can't really sell it.
No market.
So we look at things both from a wine and a business perspective immediately and try and distill down what's interesting enough to get samples or have a conversation. So I think Mick hit it on the head. You have to really understand. Again, you're not going to understand everything because you're not in this market, and we appreciate that. However, you have to know how your neighbors are pricing their wines and what the category looks like in the U.S. market.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one.
Go right ahead, please.
I'm going to borrow from Mick, or continue from Mick's idea of doing homework. The homework that I think is essential that an exporter or a producer of wine or spirits, for that matter, part of that homework is knowing whom you're calling. Look on the website of the person you're about to call and see if there's a possibility for the product that you're producing, the wine or the spirit that you're producing, to have a place in that portfolio. Anyone who calls me trying to sell me champagne, I don't even bother. We are agents of an important champagne house, and I will not accept any competition in our book to that producer. So there's absolutely no reason for a champagne producer to make a pitch to me, because it will go absolutely nowhere. On the other hand, there are areas in our portfolio that are open, and a smart producer looking at those areas of opportunity might find someone on the end of the phone line, myself, who would listen for a moment.
Okay. I want to get a sense of who's out in the audience. So can you raise your hands if any producers that are out here, suppliers who are trying to get into the U.S. market? Probably 4 or 5. Okay, the other people who are here, are you part of the U.S. industry or are you from overseas? Raise your hand if you're from overseas. Boy, I'm not hitting on, who are all these people? So yeah, we'll open it up to questions. And who's got one? We got one right over here. Wait for the microphone.
Could you give us some input on margins that distributors want?
Margins?
Margins, markups, what, I don't know.
Yeah,
One time you call it margins, next time you call it markups.
Well,
a lot of people in the industry don't actually understand the difference, so either way you can tell me.
Well, I'll just answer since I'm closest here, but everyone, I think you'll get the same answer from everyone. An importer generally needs anywhere from 28 to 33%. A wholesaler needs anywhere from 25 to 30%, and a retailer, and these are margins, needs somewhere around 33%. That's about standard, and obviously everyone's looking for opportunities to earn more, and they come in various places and in various ways depending on how you cut or slice the distribution channel and the go-to-market strategy.
I just want to make one comment. If you're interested in the difference, I did a blog post on it a couple of weeks ago, margin versus markup, two sides of the same coin, very simply explained with the formula that's there, specifically because we find a lot of suppliers don't know the difference, and it is very, very critical that you know, because that's going to be the difference between profitability and not. So if you go to my website and look at my blog, you'll see that article. Okay, next question, one over here.
The microphone people get it.
Good morning, guys. I'm a wholesaler here in New York and New Jersey. So a lot of feedback we got from retailers in Q1 is that it was very slow. And so just wondering from your, one retailer who's been in existence almost 20 years said it was the worst year he had last year. So from your experience, is this election ripple or should we be looking outside the box?
Go ahead.
I think it's a little too, I'm hearing the same.
Yeah.
I mean, our business this year, I mean, we're a very consistent company, but it's great, and then it's soft, and then it's soft, and then it's good. It seems much more volatile for the first 4 to 5 months of the year. We're hearing the same story from our retail partners, that these are dark days. I don't know if it's as simple as blaming it on the election. I actually think it's far more complicated than that. I think there is a lot at play. There's the difference between consumer confidence and what we're reading about go and Amazon's market cap and Tesla, and I think the real impact of money at the street level. And I think they're two different stories. And personally, as we run our business, I'm much more concerned with what I'm seeing on the street than what I'm reading in the paper.
I think, if I may, that the numbers I saw at the end of the year in Wine Business Monthly were that direct-to-consumer shipping has become a $2.3 billion business. I believe the Supreme Court, we did a lot of work at Sherry on the Supreme Court decision. The retailers, of course, did not ultimately win the right to ship directly, but the wineries did. It's still a little complicated, convoluted with freight and all that, but overall, the wineries in America have, in very short order, I think the starter's pistol went off probably in 2005, so let's give it 16 years to last December, $2.3 billion. Napa Valley is what, the #1 tourist destination in America, even more than Disney. I read that somewhere, whether it's true or false, but I mean, people love to go to Italy, people love to go to Tuscany, but they love to go to South Africa. But South Africa is a 2-week commitment. It's a wonderful place if you have the time to go. But the tourism rub-off from South Africa to Madison Avenue isn't the same as in Napa Valley. But now, as your client goes out there, there's a very good chance that it's beautiful out there, you feel special out there. Maybe the winemaker had some crazy experiment, but they only sell it to club members. Well, they couldn't sell it to us retailers, so of course they only sell it to club members. But there's that special thing that American wineries can lay hands on in a nice way on the retail client. And it's $2.3 billion has to be cutting into business.
And growing like this.
That speaks to the domestic business, and I think one of the issues, and Martin, you may want to comment on this, is importers can't really participate very much in direct-to-consumer, can they? Or can they?
No, they cannot. And certainly producers cannot. So.
Offshore producers.
But, I mean, direct-to-consumer from Californian wineries, yes, California represents 70% of the wine market, no matter how it gets to the market. So it can be direct-to-consumer, it can be through the three-tier system, it can be winery to distributor. But imported wines are only 25 to 30% of the entire wine market, period.
Our industry is not the quickest to adapt to anything. We are not at the vanguard generally. I think what you're seeing at retail is also part of what happened to Barnes & Noble's 12 years ago. You know, we will see some of our flagship retailers are telling us times are dark, dark, dark. Meanwhile, this 3,000 square foot store that you wouldn't think is doing any business is doing enormous business, but 80% of it is being packed and shipped. I think this is a brick and mortar story for beverage alcohol as well.
I agree.
Okay, another question? Right there. Oh, sorry. Right here, in the front row.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to know how global warming is impacting the wine industry, basically. How it's affecting your costs and money and packaging and everything, global warming.
Well, I thought we heard from President Trump that's a hoax.
Sorry. So far, I don't see an impact in the logistics or the packaging, not yet. But there's definitely been an impact in wine styles and in wine production has been impacted in some ways, as best we can tell, by global warming. But I haven't seen it in the supply chain too much yet.
The more immediate impact for I think for all of us is, and I don't know if you want to tie this a little more, are just local weather trends. Like, for example, right, Sancerre was decimated with hail, and our pricing went up 25% for the 2016 vintage. So again, it's not directly on point with what you're talking about, but I think severe weather patterns, and again, for our business, particularly in Europe, have certainly impacted our business.
Yeah, I think severe weather patterns, and we've certainly had a spate of them this spring. We've always dealt with that, and as a market guy, from various perspectives these days, I deal a lot in Italy. I mean, my background is Bordeaux and French wine, but I have a special fondness for Italy. I have a lot of clients in Italy. I think, and I'll put this out there and somebody can disagree with me, but I think Brunello, for instance, Montalcino, people have started to embrace it as one of the great, or obviously we've embraced it for a while now, as one of the great red wines, something that maybe you buy and you cellar because it's a fabulous wine. But over the last 10 to 15 years, where we used to have, I mean, when it was winemaking as well, but before global warming, when I came up and was selling Bordeaux, we didn't have the ripeness that we have now in many places due to global warming. And Montalcino in specific, it's my opinion that we have had, I was with one of my producers, it's another great vintage. And I said, damn it. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, your importers have warehouses full of wine. You've had 7 great vintages out of the last 10. Where does this wine go? People stop. When you have 3 great vintages out of 10, back in the day, this was a reality in Bordeaux and many places, well, the consumer has to buy. This is a great vintage. You've got to put that red wine away because there's not going to be another really good vintage for 3, 4, 5 years. That's the reality of the past. Now, it's been my observation, and I'll stick to Montalcino, but 7 or 8 very good to excellent vintages out of 10. It's been my observation, and you see it on the, I mean, I monitor some of the closeout websites. I mean, where does this wine go? Ultimately, a lot of times the wine goes into the discount chain because we have to sell the wine. Everybody in the equation has to move product, and price at some point becomes secondary. But I've seen in certain red wine production areas where they produce investment grade wine that we're having more really good vintages, and I've watched it in the case of Brunello depress the price down from what we used to get $75 for, now we're getting $35 for, because there's so much of it. There was also the story the other day that hasn't hit the market yet, and it's going to be an interesting marketing challenge. At Tétanger, for instance, did you see the article where they just bought vineyard land in England? Because, why? Because they don't want ripeness, so they're moving north. I was in Tasmania 2 years ago. They're also buying property down there and moving south, because I mean, it's definitely having an impact, and it's going to be slowly felt in the market, I'm sure.
Next question. Over there. Paola.
Hi, good morning. I work for the Italian Trade Commission, so this discussion is really interesting. I have two questions, actually. You were saying before we have, like, the producer have 30 seconds to gather your attention, and they need to do their homework, and that's what we say to them every time they call us. But we are doing the same with you. We're trying, at least, to get in touch also as a government agency to the important to understand what you really want. And we are doing our homework too. So we were looking at your website, etc. But when I don't see that when I see that you are missing a certain kind of wine, I still don't know if you are interested in it or it's your choice not to have it. So this is one thing. Like, is there any, I don't know, any way that you can explain, I know it's difficult, the process in which you enlarge your portfolio? And then the second question is about the wholesale part, so maybe we need to, if you can reply this, then I will ask the other questions.
Okay.
Boy, buongiorno. Is really not an is not an easy question to answer, because sometimes we don't know what we're looking for. You know, we're just looking for something to grab our attention. Now, in certain times there are particular niches or appellations that we know we need for the portfolio, and we'll hunt those out. But I mean, going back to our earlier discussion, at least for us, I mean, we've built our whole business on being entrepreneurs. So we're out hustling, looking for new products, new producers, new ideas every single day. And so, you know, I encourage folks to send things to us. We try to look at as many as possible and see what catches our eye. But I don't think there's any magic formula. You know, the evolution of our portfolio has been measured in some ways, and other ways it's just sort of happened.
And it's a little scary in a time of extraordinary distributor consolidation. SKU count is a war right now. I mean, we as a company truly are operating at this point as one in, one out. I don't want a larger SKU count. So something you could conceivably be facing with anyone is the reality that they're not looking for any new SKUs. You know, you find your inspiration when you bump into it and you say, okay, that's meaningful. Something Martin said earlier that I think is really important for this question is we're super old-fashioned at Cape Classics. I still write written thank you cards. I mean, we believe in service and old-fashioned values. Something that comes into my inbox that just says, dear sir, that I know went to 40 other people gets deleted. And it's not that I'm rude, I don't have time. But as Martin said, the more specific you can be, when someone writes to me and says, I was on your website and I can see what you're doing in France and I know that producer and I love this vision and I noticed you don't have a Sancerre, well boy, there is a 10x likelihood I'm gonna stop and read that note. Because it's meaningful, it means you did something, you didn't just shotgun an approach to everyone.
I would add one point. A simple way to get closer to that is subscribe to industry trade magazines, particularly the electronic ones, and if you monitor those over time, just read Cape Classics news releases, They tell the story of what they're looking for and what they're doing. So again, if you do your homework and do your diligence, it isn't just going to the website, but it's kind of trying to keep your fingers on the pulse of the industry. When Frederick Wildman picks up a new thing or opens a new area of or country, it'll be news, it'll be in the trade press, and you'll be able to see that. It doesn't necessarily help you and the individual producers, but the closer they can come to get away from a generic introduction towards something more specific, the better off you're going to be.
I think it's also important. I think the overall message is keep trying. One thing to remember that with quality on the rise, I think the new generation of wine buyers, I mean, I'm jealous only in that it's especially the young sommeliers and the by the glass programs in the top restaurants. I think the rise in quality is a great thing, but it's also a very tricky thing from a marketing standpoint, because it's the trade level consumer, the retail buyer or the restaurant buyer, has become rather fickle and rather spoiled, because whatever they buy, whatever they look at, whatever we sampled them on, I mean, as gatekeepers, we were talking before, we really don't want to look at anything that isn't excellent, because excellent isn't as hard to find as it used to be. But having said that, I know I work in Italy a lot, as I was saying, and the process of the OCM funding, we're finding that, and other funding, be it independent or not, government funding, whatever, matching funds, whatever. I'm finding from my company, from BSG, if I'm coming to sell these guys a product, the ability to have a producer that can bring journalists to the property, that can bring, legally, buyers to the property. And when I come to make a pitch to these guys, the market is so tough. If I come with one of my wineries, sometimes if I can, I say, well, you know, I've already, the restaurant buyer from so-and-so, such and such a chain, is interested. He knows the producer. This journalist just wrote an article about this particular region. It's very hard to get any traction with journalists these days. Typically, the first question I get when I say to any of the magazines or any independent journalist, is the wine imported to the States? We really don't want to write about anything that isn't imported to the States. And that's certainly valid. But I still think that it is important that the consortios, the government agencies, whomsoever, continue to help us influence the people that actually drive the business. And they can drive business to these guys by performing a function that was largely belonged to the importer, belonged to the distributor 30 years ago. It's now on the producer, on the region, on the consortio in your case.
You said you had another one?
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much for these feedbacks, and you know, they're really appreciated. And one of the other question is, as Rob was already anticipating, the fact that a lot of wholesalers are merging and there are this big distribution group, and then on the other side, in each state, you can find maybe the small importer that has also the distribution license in that particular state or all around. And so it's not really, I don't know how really to put this as a question, but how do you see this? Like, how it's, as you said, it's, you put one new SKU, you take out something else. That's okay. But is there any hope in the future? Like, this is how these people, like this new producer that maybe are really talented, can enter in this market?
I believe in capitalism deeply. I believe in the power of capitalism to do good. I believe that markets correct themselves. Distributors are only going to get bigger. I don't see that changing. Do you see? I think we're just at the beginning, believe it or not, which is really hard for everyone in this room. The good news is that goes, the market will have options for people that make great wine. There will be surprise number 3s and surprise number 4 little companies. You know, there's going to be a need for service and interesting product and passion, and someone will fill that void. The trick is, and I hate to be pessimistic, it's just making sure that someone can actually pay you.
I'm going to jump in. To answer your question, is there hope? The answer is there's a lot of hope. The wine business is extremely dynamic. It's growing. The United States is the largest, now the biggest wine market in the world, and it's a sophisticated market, so there's definitely hope. The question is how to negotiate it, but there are people who can help do that. I mean, that's what Steve's business is. That's a little bit now what Mick's business is. The producer needs to define a strategy, and that strategy can be working with a national importer, but if it's going to be working with a national importer, that comes with a cost. There's a cost of promotion, there's the cost of the margin for that level of distribution, there's a cost of access to that importer's distribution network, or that producer can choose for example, a producer of a certain size might choose just to be in 3 or 4 markets in the United States with 3 or 4 local distributors. Those are choices that have to be made, and they really probably are best made either on one's own, having done that homework, having traveled a little bit, having seen what's going on, or again, there are people like Steve, like Mick, and there are others who are consultants. I know several who've worked for us, worked for me, and now are masters of wine, and they help, they're kind of guides into the market and can help a producer define a strategy that will fit that particular producer. There's no one answer because every producer of wine is so individual.
I think that's
but there's
like
a lot
the key
of hope.
right there, that you have to be non-traditional. If you think you're going to go the route that everybody else made, that road is closed. It's not even under construction anymore. It doesn't exist. So you have to find non-traditional, creative ways to navigate the complexities of the system, as Martin said, but that still fit within the rules. That's kind of the challenge.
I disagree. You can go a traditional route if you have the product, if you have the promotion, if you have the pricing, if you have the firepower to get into the distribution network at a certain level, and you're calling that the traditional route, it can be done. But it takes certain resources. If all you have is a good product and 2,000 cases of a Brunello di Montalcino, forget about it. It's not going to work. You're maladapted to the distribution network at that point.
But sorry, just a remark. But don't you think, I spoke with a big Italian producer, and maybe they are like, listen, I am with these amazing distributor, you know, they are everywhere, and we know who are these distributors, but they have a book big like this, and they don't sell my wine. And maybe it's a top producer in Italy. So that is, you know,
well, listen,
I mean,
how do you do that?
Yeah.
The only thing the only real answer to that is we'd have to sit down and look at the specifics of the problem. You know, it's like you're like a patient walking into the doctor's office and what you're saying is it hurts. Well, we have to figure out what's wrong because something's obviously not working, and that's going to be very specific to this particular producer and what he or she is doing.
And the producer has to be, it's not like you can say, wow, we finally got a big importer, now we can go home and the money's going to roll in. That might have been true 50 years ago, but now the producer has to continue to be their own advocate within that portfolio. Martin's portfolio, Rob's portfolio, these are very well selected, well-focused portfolios, but then you get the big ones like this, and that probably gets you national distribution, but then what? Then what? You're in Las Vegas, then what? This is why visiting the market, creating advocates within those sales forces. Yep. You've got to work with. So your people, the people from the winery have to come and do the work. Promotions, but you need to be, the bigger the portfolio, the more the winery has to work to become their own advocate within that portfolio, because they're not going to do it for you. And they've probably got, I mean, I had a little Chianti in a gigantic portfolio with Antinori. Well, I know the guy on the street because I used to be a buyer. I know the guy coming into the shops has a quota on Antinori. They have to, because the owner of the company wants to keep that franchise, and they certainly should. But my little guy, No, unless, as we work with them, you come to the market. You need to create your own advocates, your own salespeople that are here once you leave. This work used to be done for you, the winery. No more. You have to be your own advocate on a continuing basis.
I think the headline for that is something that my partner Howard likes to say is distribution in the United States is not free. There's this expectation that suppliers come in and that you're just going to give you the brand and you're going to do all the work. Turn that around.
And that's the exact same thing I think we face as importers now, right? I mean, importers, again, when you read about the wine business, and we got into the business in 2009, it was, okay, if you have a product that you can get into the hands of a distributor, then they'll go out and sell it. That doesn't even happen anymore, never mind from the producer level, right? So we have our own sales force. I mean, we make all our own chain calls. We locally have a distribution network, but I mean, we ship wine through 3 of the largest wholesalers in the country. RNDC, great partner for us, but they have 7,000 employees. There's probably 22 of them that even know I exist. So we have to go down there and do the ride with and make the chain calls with them and do the legwork because they have quotas to answer to major suppliers. And a sure way to not make it in this business is for somebody like us or a new producer to go try to tangle with Gallo, right? I think our entire exercise and how we built the company is to go find those niches and those channels. Say, okay, here's the dominant brands in this category. Where can I find something that's different or unique? Perfect example. We have a Chianti Classico Riserva in our portfolio that we sell about 10,000 cases a year, and the quality is excellent. It gets positive reviews from the major critics every single year. And on the shelf, it's $2 less than Rufino's Gold Label. So that's what we do. And we're never going to sell however many thousands and thousands of cases Rufino sells of their Gold Label, but we have access to 10,000 cases, plus or minus, and we sell every single one of them by finding that little channel to say, here's the major dominant national brand, and here's our little brand that's really good, that costs $2 less, but people like it, and now it's got its own little following. So that's you have to have a hook, and that's what I would tell all the producers. Going back to probably one of the first things we said.
We had a question over there.
Yeah, could you guys speak to what are national retailers looking for? What are maybe the big box people or Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, grocery stores? I mean, are they just looking for price? You know, we're hearing about alternative packaging. Just, I don't know, your thoughts on those guys.
I could comment a little bit on Costco, only because we do a lot of business with them. Again, relative in size. What I'm seeing there is, and how I try to describe it to people is if 5 years ago or whenever I started calling on them, here's all the shelf space in a box, right? And call it 90% of it were national brands, if you were, and 10% of it was this sliver for first to market, just got 90 points from Robert Parker, alternative packaging, alternative label, whatever. I'm definitely seeing an increase in that shelf space. The national brands, they're going to be there, but I think that new, different, interesting, slightly better priced, some shtick. Those wines, the mentality of the national buyers that I've seen they're very, very sophisticated, and they care very much about their customers, right? Like if you talk to, again, I can't speak for them, if you talk to the Costco buyers that I talk to, they're always talking about the members, right? The Costco members, and delivering them great value. And that's why they buy our Chianti Classico Riserva and why we sell it out every single year. A lot of it goes to them in certain regions because it's got a unique spot next to the national brands, right? With better quality, or equivalent quality, if you will, and positive press, vintage after vintage. So I think you have to keep you always have to keep in mind is not just finding an importer, finding a distributor. It's who's actually pulling it off the shelf, and the person's making the buying decisions. Why are they buying? But I think there are definitely opportunities, again, in those skinny channels once you figure out what they are, to whether it's the national chains or the general market.
Rob, do you want to? I mean, he used to be the buyer at Trader Joe's.
I think it depends on the client. You know, there are some that it's ratings. Literally, the only gauntlet you must survive is ratings. Someone sends you a spreadsheet. The rating you put in either meets their quality or it doesn't. It could be automated buying at this point. Some it's story, some it's interest, some it's members, some it's, it really depends on the channel. For some, it's as simple as GP. If you can't get them over 40%, they don't care what you've got. It doesn't matter. Their business model says they can sell anything they think they can sell as long as you're getting them over 40 points.
And a national brand might be quite competitive with their competitors, whereas yours is something special. If you, and perhaps GP is the only way you get them behind your product, but if they're making more on this Chianti than they are on Ruffino Gold Label, well, that's how you drive them, the gatekeeper, to drive his salespeople to your product.
It's a great
And
point.
it's an investment on the part, ultimately it's an investment on the part of the winery.
And when you look at retail in particular, Martin hit on this earlier, when Martin spoke about margins, something that's jumped out at me in the last 10 years is I actually think the importer's margin, you guys feel free to chirp in, has stayed pretty stable in that 28 to 30, whatever. I find the distributor's margin has creeped up a little. It used to get away with 25, now it's 28, now it's 30. The retail margin 10 years ago, I felt we could work with just about anyone at 25 points. You know, the guy that went to 30 was like, whoa. And then the guy that went to 35 was like, wow, you're gouging me. And now 40 is normal at retail. So you've got these 3 steps in the chain, and that last one, the gross profit needs are growing and growing. So sadly, I think the quickest route, if you have a fantastic product, if we can start with the baseline of fantastic product, getting to those guys means helping them make a lot of money.
Yeah,
That's true.
I want to go back to the question I heard you, which was what retailers are looking for. And I think it's the theme that I'm hearing, or that I'm at least expounding on a little bit, is that the wine business, for the most part, is not one thing. It's a very complex organism. And retailers are the same as wholesalers, importers, distributors. There's not one retailer like another retailer. Each one is looking for something else. Each one is competing in his or her own market in a different way, and has individual needs and individual circumstances that we as suppliers to those retailers need to be very sensitive to. Total Wine is very different from Whole Foods. Whole Foods is very different from Trader Joe. Trader Joe is very different from Kroger. Kroger is very different from Safeway. Safeway is very different from Publix, from Harris Teeter, and on and on and on, from Wegmans. Each one of these has its own culture. And it's up to us as marketers of wine, as producers of wine, to be sensitive to that culture. That's where success lies, and that's where hope lies, by the way, going back to your question.
I want to change it up a little bit here and throw it. I'm going to set you up, just letting you know, Colin. We've been talking a lot about wines. I'd like to change the focus for a moment to spirits, and we have a producer in the audience from who I've known from Washington, the state of Washington, who's producing a line of craft spirits. With all that's happening in the craft spirits division, can you comment on what some of the issues you're facing relative to what we've just been talking about in terms of breaking in? Can we get a mic over here?
Hi, my name's Colin, and thanks, Steve, for the intro. My business is an e-distillery, and we're a small craft producer. And to touch on a couple of questions, you mentioned distribution consolidation. One of the challenges I find is talking to a distributor, similar to your company, Martin, who's entering into the spirits industry. And not talking about your business, but some of the guys, frankly, don't have the sales staff that are educated the same as they've been educated in wine over the last 20 years. So they're suddenly trying to grab market by asking their wine sales guys to suddenly represent spirits. And that's the kiss of death for my business. So it's finding a distributor with a footprint that can actually educate their sales guys and gals to actually sell products. Are you seeing that from your experience? Or are you seeing the consolidation coming from, let's just buy the expertise that's existing in another distributor, consolidate them within our business, versus trying to educate your existing sales staff?
Well, I'll go first here quickly. We have a spirits division at Frederick Wildman, and we tried to sell the spirits through our wholesale division, and the wholesale salespeople are all wine people, and they failed. And so we brought our spirits portfolio to our partner, Southern Glazer, and they are succeeding for the most part, even though the dynamics are quite different. So I think, if I heard you correctly, I'm agreeing with you that in some cases, wine salespeople with wine education and producer education are not very well equipped to sell certain kinds of spirits. I think in the craft world, however, the wine sales people do understand craft, because craft is what wine is about, provenance is what wine's about, and craft spirits and single distillery products from on a spirit basis are well adapted. So again, it's very, very individual. If you're having problems in the distribution channel, and I'm not sure you are, the question is why, and really you have to look at all of the elements. You have to look at your promotion, your pricing, the quality of your product, your packaging, your relationship with your distributors, all of those. There's not one thing, it's all of those things.
Yeah, and also I think to an earlier point we discussed, you take our company, for example, Connecticut wholesaler, with effectively 5 reps, and we're just getting into craft spirits, but you've certainly got a lot better chance getting into my book than Martin. So that's what you have to balance, because you know, we may give it a shot. It's going to be our wine team, but you're going to get our attention because we only have 3 spirits brands right now, and so you know, we're going to be out there and we're actually going to be working for you, as opposed to trying to, you know, jam your products. And listen, we do the same thing with our wine business: jam your products into the big distributors because they have access to the chains and et cetera, et cetera. That may not be the route for you, depending on, you know, what your production capacity is, how much you want to scale the business, whether you can kind of have this measured growth. And it's all market by market, company by company. So.
Question? One over there.
Hello, good morning.
Hi.
Thank you guys for taking the time out to speak to us. Your insight is greatly appreciated. Just on the consumer level, do you guys see that consumers are stocking premium spirits and wines in their cellars, or they're kind of going through them more quickly?
I can jump in.
Go ahead.
I think when people talk about cellaring, I think it's totally make-believe, to be honest.
Totally what?
Make-believe.
Yeah.
I think it's make-believe. I think it's stuff that they're words we use and things we say it's language pointed at the proverbial 1%ers.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think this leads to a much bigger topic for a different day, but I think the disconnect between people really buying wine and how wine gets to them is pretty vast. Sure, are there people with storing 500, 600, 1,000, 2,000 bottles in their cellars? Sure, but that's not the market. That's not the market. I think it is for a long time now, maybe driven by Robert Parker. It is a drink now market for the most part. If we're going to paint with a roller, it's a drink now market.
Yeah. Totally agree.
I agree.
Totally agree. Because vintage variation and whatnot, I mean, and the rise in quality. We used to cellar wine because, wow, this is really good. I have to put it away because there isn't going to be any for a while. There's going to be plenty now. There's going to be more tomorrow. So we have now a very fortunate and fickle consumer, but it's a great time to be a wine and spirits consumer. Never better.
Another question?
I guess this is on.
There you go.
This question kind of went back to where we were a little bit further back in the conversation. And as a small producer, you guys all mentioned saying, you know, trying to get bigger mind share at the distributor level for small producers, because, you know, obviously we can't outspend or spend on the level of our bigger counterparts. Is there a particular strategy besides work withs? Because we do work withs all the time. And the sad bit for us is that we're spending the money, we're spending the time, we're going there, but a lot of times it doesn't stick. And, you know, we're struggling with trying to figure out what is the best way to really leverage that relationship, and how do we find those 15 people in the distributor that are going to be our brand ambassadors, and what kind of strategy can we get from the management at the distributors to help us do that? Or is there a way to do that?
If you figure out the answer to that question, then call me and let me know.
I thought not.
I would point all of your energy at the consumer, to be honest with you. I think in one side of this, there's so much noise and so much complexity. On the other side of this, there's enormous hope, because there's never been a time in American history where there's been more and more dynamic wine drinkers. Something we drive in our company is the pull. I'm tired of pushing. I'm exhausted by the push and the sales meetings and the work with and the incentive trips. And when we talk to our suppliers, you want to get someone's attention on why you should be in someone's portfolio? Tell me in Paris or Milan, you've gained 300 on-premise placements and your Facebook fan base has quadrupled. Give me some sort of metrics that tells me the consumer is interested. I would rather our suppliers make amazing videos on YouTube, work on Instagram, work on Facebook, do something to create energy behind their story and their brand that the consumer can find to help create pull, instead of flying over here to do 10 work withs. I think you've got to point your energy at the consumer.
I would add one specific example of something that everybody can do and doesn't cost any money and is incredibly valuable, and that is claim your winery on Vivino. Vivino has arguably 22 million downloads. Put that in perspective, Wine Spectator's circulation is 400,000. So you're talking 2 orders of magnitude bigger. It's free, called Claim Your Winery. You can go there. And what that means is, to Rob's point, the consumer is taking a picture of your label. You get to control what the message is that consumer is going to see. So instead of waiting for Wine Spectator to evaluate it, you can put in your ratings, your reviews, your winemaker's notes, your pairing notes, all that kind of stuff. You control that, and then that content would get potentially scraped by other type things. Another one similar to that is Wine Searcher. Make sure your wines are being found on Wine Searcher. The trade is using Wine Searcher pretty much every day. It's this fabulous tool. So these things are out there, and there's ways of, I don't mean gaming the system, but working within the system, because they're content hungry. If you can provide it, you're a valid source. That's great.
But actually,
I'm gonna go ahead.
I was just going to say, you are doing the right thing still. Just what we have found again, and we're as a small importer, we are effectively in the same position as you, because we're representing a lot of producers. It just takes a lot of time, and you need to develop champions, as you said, whether it's of your brand or our little book inside of the distributors, who then eventually you'll come to mind. Oh boy, this is really good. This is the price point. I've got a great buyer here looking for this, and it just takes time. But that is what you need. You need some champions, and then you can help accelerate that process as best as possible with dollars, right? So rep incentives. I mean, a sure way to get a rep to pay attention when they have all sorts of demands from big suppliers is that there is a rep incentive in place for your product for some period of time. We find that does move the needle, and that and again finding champions, whether it's within the distributor or ultimately as you're doing the work with, building a personal rapport with 1 or 2 or 3 key accounts that we're going to get behind your products. It just takes time.
Where are you from? So Oregon producer. Okay. Are you in this market? Well, we can go both ways. There's one thing that you need to do. This is very basic and often not thought of. You need to have inventory in the system. If you will not create one brand ambassador if you run out of stock, you will not be able to have any loyalty with a sales force anywhere if the sales force doesn't believe that when the rep makes a placement in an on-premise account that wine can be shipped again the following week and the week after that and the week after that. So the first job is to make sure that there's sufficient inventory of the wines that you produce and of the core wines that you want to see in the market in that distributorship. If the distributor says to you, Well, you go out and pre-sell, we'll get you samples, and then we'll place the order after that. You're in the wrong distributor. That will never work. It sounds good, and it will never work. So your first job is to make sure that you have a partner, a distributor partner, who says, I see it, I believe in it, and we're gonna get behind this. And get behind it means putting your money where your mouth is and placing an order.
I've also noticed a lot of the small wineries that I meet with, we'll say European for now. I don't know of any, and maybe I'm focused on this industry, of course I'm focused on this industry, but I mean I have my hobbies and the things that I also do. I've never seen an industry that had such a collection of poor websites as many of the producers that come to me trying to create market access. I don't know why that is. Also, though, I don't know your winery, and I'm sure you probably have a darn good one because, just because. But when you, especially an American winery, it's important that if you are in some way, shape, or form using your website both as a tool to reach the public and as a selling tool to sell direct, as you specifically have the right to do, that you don't undercut your potential retailer out there. As a retailer, the worst you could see is a winery selling their own product at a price that someone is coming to me that I can't possibly touch. You have to be sensitive to the fact that you're out there selling, and you have to support your client or your proposed client down the line.
Further to that point, one of the things that was brought up is the whole concept of brand ambassadors, brand champions, feet on the street, people who work for the supplier to shadow or parallel what a distributor does. It was, I say 5-10 years ago, was kind of a unique thing that brands brought to the party that differentiated them from everybody else. Now it's almost a standard, and the costs are outrageous on the supplier side. Where's the future of that, and where's the utility of that in today's market?
That only works for certain kinds of brands, Steve. That doesn't work for wine producers from small regions, or the brand ambassador is the owner. The brand ambassador is the sales manager. The brand ambassador is the rep. There's an ambassador for a champagne brand, that's one thing, for visibility, for tastings, for those kinds of promotional activities, above the line expenses, but there are no brand ambassadors for any of the wineries we work with. I've got 40 or 50 producers. There are no brand ambassadors except for the spirits. The brand ambassador is the owner, who's going to sell me, put the product in our warehouse, and help do a sales meeting for our salespeople. See Sherry Lehman or Morel or any number of retailers around the country. That's a brand ambassador. It has to be linked to sales. There's an old saying, does a tree make a sound when it falls in the forest if no one's there to hear it? No matter how good a wine is or a spirit is, if no one's there to drink it, it doesn't matter. And it's only drunk when it's sold. So it has to be sold. So the idea of an ambassadorship or an ambassador outside of the selling function is simply expensive.
Okay, that's what I was talking about, is that are replicating what a distributor salesman does.
Well, they're not replicating, they're helping the distributor. The distributor is going to be the logistics partner to get the wine into the retail outlet. Mm-hmm. So it's not independent of. Mm-hmm. We have sales reps around the country. Are they brand ambassadors? No, they're sales managers. They call on the distributor, they call on the retailers, that's what their job is.
Okay. Mike, you want to jump in on that?
Well, I was going to say, I'll give you a free commercial, because the last producer that we added to our portfolio was a Portuguese winery that Steve was working with. And in fact, they had, he's here, Carlos. They had someone on the streets here, effectively as what I'll call a joint employee between a previous importer and the winery. And to us, that was a complete game changer, to have somebody that understood the brands, that had existing accounts. And to your point, I mean, we've never really run into that. I mean, none of our European producers have a full-time employee in the U.S. that they fund that's just out helping us sell wine. They'll do visits and things like that, but to the extent that you have someone in the market, it just goes back to the hook, right? So for them, they had existing accounts, someone here on the streets. I mean, that's a game changer to us. That was. I mean, as close to a no-brainer as we run into. Great products, existing accounts, somebody that knows the wines living in New York City. I mean,
it's like Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's almost unprecedented, and you're not going to hit that trifecta very often. But if you have even one of those things, and it can sound repetitive, but it just goes back to the hook. Your cousin owns 10 restaurants in Dallas. You have a friend who owns a retail shop in New York City. If you have some way to help us incubate the brand as the importer, it goes a long, long way. And if that's a 6-month intern that's being funded by the Italian Trade Network or the Tuscany Chamber of Commerce, something that helps us sink our teeth into and not just say, okay, I got to lay out cash, I've got to now import this new wine, I've got to educate my staff and try to hit the streets. To the extent you can help with that process, then it's much, much more interesting to us.
And it could be back of the house too. I mean, a digital strategy. The partners in our portfolio that are breathing life into their brands on social media do us a tremendous service. I mean, I wish they all did. So it might not even be feet on the street. It could just be breathing life into Instagram, into this, everywhere, talking about it and building a story and kind of beating a drum that helps us go sell the wine.
Another question? Got one right there.
Hello, good morning. I'm Katia from Portugal. I'm also a wine producer. I know Carlos, and I take your last the last question, and also about talking about Portuguese wines in a very specific way in U.S. market. I would like to hear from you because, of course, all of you has a long background, and all of you are in the wine business and the wine industry. So I want to hear your perspective and your opinion about Portuguese wines in U.S. market. And yeah, Michael Voto, I know that you are working with a wine producer in Portugal, and you are being very successful. Of course, like you said, Carlos is here permanently working the clients, but all the others, and we, like that lady over there, I'm a small wine producer, and we are working here for several years, and it takes a long time to establish and to get these placements and rotation. So I would like to hear from you about Portuguese wines in a specific way.
I'll take that one. Yeah, and in fact, I mean, it just goes back to some of the themes we've talked about, right? We know that there's great wine being produced in Portugal, right? And the pricing is often very, very competitive vis-a-vis the rest of the European market, right? You can find quality wine at 2 to 3 euros, say. Whereas in France and Italy and now Spain creeping up a little bit, it's becoming more and more difficult. So there's absolutely an opportunity there. It's on this side of the equation, educating consumers, and then the Portuguese have some unique things going against them, right? Pronunciation of grapes. So you don't think about this, but consumers are intimidated because they don't know any of the grapes and they can't pronounce them and they don't know what they are. So you've got this whole myriad of challenges, but what does Portugal have going for it? Exactly like Spain, and I think the panel has lived through this even more than I have, but really we've seen it in our business where in 2009 we only imported Italian wines. In 2015 and 16 we sold more Spanish wines than Italian. Why is that? Because there are great values out there. They're getting a lot of press. Now, Robert Parker has a dedicated person for Spain and Portugal. Now, Wine Enthusiast reviews more Portuguese and Spanish wine, twice as many as they did 5 years ago. So you're getting more exposure, and the products there's quality products at good pricing. But I mean, what we're finding is and again, we've just started with what you're talking about, but we've already previously, worked with Vino Verde and some ports and things like that. Super, super price sensitive. You have to, in order to try to compete against the handful of what I call real national brands in certain Portuguese categories, you have to be super sharp on pricing, and you've got to really check every box. But yeah, certainly I think there's an opportunity. We're obviously bullish on it. We're investing a lot of time and capital in the market, and we think that there's a good opportunity there.
Okay, so we're coming up to our hard stop. I was not trying to make this a commercial for the Portuguese Producers or Tejo, but since we're on that subject, at 11 o'clock we have a master class for Tejo. May Mata Alia is going to be presenting it. And then also at 3 o'clock, Sid, is master class for 4 p.m.? 4 to 5. Is that Beaujolais or China? Beaujolais at 4 p.m. The exhibits open at 11, same time as the master class. So we really don't have any more time for more questions. So I'd like to say thank you to the audience. I mean to the speakers. They did a great job.
Thank you to the audience.
And thank you to all of you. I think this worked out very well as interactive. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but you can find out who we are or send us emails, or everybody can contact me if they want to do something further, and I can help funnel it through to all these guys. Okay?
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.